So what I've ended up with is this. Well, it's not finished yet, but we've got a little cradle there, and it's got a countersink hole in the middle for this little screw, or for a screw that's very, very similar. We might find a shorter one. I think I saw one there. And this goes over here, and a bolt goes through there. So we've got basically a rocking axle there. Next job will be to drill this through, the same size, so that it lines up on the other side, and we'll carefully file this up nice and round on the end, and open up one side and tap the other side so that we can put a screw through here. There's another very similar bolt, goes all the way through, and the next bit really to finish this is the spring, so we're going to work on that next. So there we go, it's drilled right through. Nice sharp drill, really, really fast, and a little vise of some sort to hold this, so otherwise it's going to spin round. So that's the answer to that. Probably we could make this whatever shape we like. It's not that particular, it sort of wants to look nice and neat. And a big stocky piece is probably going to look nicer than a piece that's not. But I'm just going to file this up on a bit of an angle each side. That's pretty straightforward using the bit that we bent it around. Gently does it. We want it to look the same on both sides. To my mind, it probably still wants a little bit more off that side than that side. A little bit more angle maybe. And that's probably pretty nice. Quick run round there. If you've got a belt linisher or something, this might be a lot quicker to do it that way. I don't, so I'm going to persevere with this. But you really don't need any of that complicated equipment to do a little job like this and to have it look nice. A filing button to fit in here if you had 5 minutes with a lathe and a piece of steel might be a really nice thing to do too. But the reality is, if you're reasonably good with a file and pretty quick and you have some sort of a sense of whether something looks right or not, you can't actually see the top and the bottom of this side and this side of this at once. So we could put a lot more time into this than we really need to, I guess is what I'm probably saying. that's fairly quick and easy there to file up, so we can get it somewhere near. It doesn't take much to take enough off there to make it look nice and neat. We use that motion like that. We hardly even need to hold it in the vise to do that. So that part's nearly finished. It's pretty straightforward. One side needs to be drilled out to 3mm or 3.1, something like that, and the other side needs to be tapped to M3 to match a bolt. So I'm going to just quickly do that, and we'll put it all together and see how it looks. What I've done to drill that, rather than try and hold onto it, is just clamp that on that piece of stock again and use that to drill into, and that way the drill isn't going to spin and I've got something to hang on to. So there's a tip. So this goes in there with a little screw. I guess you could probably see that, can we? Try and get some light. There we go. There's a little countersunk 3mm screw. This will come undone, so it needs to drop a Loctite on when it's done so that it doesn't turn. And this goes in here with a big hole to the front. And this screw runs through there and does up. Probably also with a drop of Loctite on it. So that's the front axle. It's free to move and hopefully go over obstructions. And that looks pretty good. So the last part to make is the spring. Now if we have a look in the book at this picture, it shows a metal spring, and I reckon that's probably a really nice way to do that. And on the drawing, back on page 78, it shows a leaf spring. It says 75 by 6 wide, bend spring to this shape with pliers, it says, and 6 1/4 inch spring steel for the leaf spring. Now that's kind of all it tells you. That's sort of leaves it open. So I've had a bit of a mess, and I thought, well, it's the best way to make a spring for this. And a couple of options. A good friend suggested feeler gauge stock, and I have got some, and I did make one out of 1/8 hour feeler gauge stock. So cutting it out's pretty easy. When we soften it, we want a piece like this, which is quite soft and will bend fairly easily and stay bent. If we harden it, we'll end up with a piece like this, which is quite brittle. Look, it's fairly easily cracked and bent. You hear that go? So ideally, when we're finished, we want a piece that's like this. It's springy. It's going to stay in the same shape that it was, and is nice. Now, I don't know much about this particular piece of spring steel, but it is fairly easy to soften. We need to get it hot and keep it hot for a bit and let it cool down nice and slow. That's really the basic principle here. So we'll come up and get some space here. These little disposable gas bottles are great. The hot part of the flame's up here rather than down here. Now, it's unlikely that you're going to get this really, really soft, but you'll get it so that it's workable, and it's much, much easier to get it so that it's very, very hard and snaps. Tempering will be the fussy bit. So when we got it so that it'll straighten out nicely with our fingers and stay nice and straight, we're going to call that soft enough to work. What we really want to do is bend this to match the drawing. So I'm going to do that now. The little bit of a bend on the end, each end, both the same way, like that. So I've got a piece there that looks like it's probably going to do the job. It's not a particularly easy job, but if we take our time, nice and steady, don't want sharp bends or it will still break, I think. But a bit of a groove in the, or hump in the top there like that, and I've just grabbed it in the middle there. And I bent it, and then I bent it back with my fingers, so that was pretty straightforward there. They both want to be about the same on each side, I think, is probably the number one thing. And we've got a spring. Next job really is to give it a clean. There's a few ways we could do that. Probably just a Scotch-Brite, sort of the easy way. Make sure he's still the same on both sides. And anyway, next step is just to harden it, and I've got an ice cream container full of water here. Pick it up carefully in a pair of pliers, and we're just going to get him red hot again, or hot enough to temper. We don't want it to sag. Hot enough to harden. Gently does it. Just so it's just turning red. And probably for the purposes of this spring, that's going to be fine. Normally to temper it, I would just pass it through the flame. That's quite springy. It's also quite hard. If we were to bend this, it would just snap. And probably with a little bit more care and a little bit more time, we could probably temper that out so it wouldn't. But it's a fine line with this thin piece of stuff between being hard enough to be springy and being soft so that it just bends out. So anyway, I'm going to call that done. If we just slip one wheel off and the washer off, this spring should just nicely go through that hole. So there we go. That's the spring fitted in the front axle. Have a look. There's dozens of videos on heat treating. Things get complicated. If we're heat treating a big block of steel, generally a lot easier than something that's only 1/8 thou thick. But I don't think that's going to bust. I think that's going to be fine, and I'm going to call that a day. To be honest, probably a heavier spring would work. If you had something that was about probably 1.2 millimeters, something like that. If you had a piece of 1.2 or 30 thou feeler gauge, you might get on a lot better than this. That's probably pretty good. It just goes on there. And the screw goes in the front. Now that's probably nice, and it works fine. It was really difficult to anneal and then to bend up straight so that it looks nice, and harden and temper the feeler gauge stock so that it works. That's nice, soft, probably pretty good suspension, and I kind of like that spring. But very difficult to get to look nice, and very difficult to get so that it works. The next spring I made was out of brass, and I just got a piece of brass and I've basically hammered it on a flat surface until it was work hardened and springy, and bent that up the same shape, and put it together. Now that sort of works too. It's springy, and it requires a fair bit more force than the other one to put it together, but once we got it done up, that's quite a bit more rigid, and probably it's not bad either. It's springy and it's good. That's probably an option, and probably an easy option. If you've got some, I think this started off as 1.6 brass, and I hammered it down pretty rigorously, just with a flat hammer on the anvil on the vise, and then filed the piece up and bent it up, and that's pretty springy. It's really not all that shabby. So the final thing that I made was a 3D printed spring, and this is what that looks like. I'll put the STL file up, and if someone's got a 3D printer and they want to do it that way, that's probably a really good way to do it. That's not a bad looking little spring, and that definitely works. It's a bit it's cheating, I guess, if we like to use that term, but that's not too shabby either. So that's how that looks, and that's not bad either. In fact, that's probably pretty good. You haven't got a lot of travel there because the spring's got to be a bit thicker to print it, but it certainly works. And I kind of like that too. So there's 3 ways to do it. I'll put the STL file on a separate post for anyone who might be interested. This is the beaten brass spring, and that's kind of, with a bit of experimentation, that's probably going to be a really good option. And this one is the feeler gauge stock, a bit of, say, 15th hour feeler gauge stock, and enough time to heat treat it and mess around with it and make 3 or 4 and get one right, and you will have pretty good results. So that's sort of what I've done there. To my mind, the 3D printed spring is probably the winner. This isn't going to get hot enough to be a problem, and it's quite a good looking thing. So I might just work with that. But the brass has certainly got enough spring in it to work. And while this is certainly doable, and if you've got a piece of 15th hour or 0.6, something like that, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6 sheet spring or an old feeler gauge, and some way of cutting it out and some way of heat treating it, it's certainly definitely an option. That's quite a nice spring too. So they all work, and there's more than one way to do this. This is just a toy engine. It's going to go round in circles on the lounge room floor. It's not going to really do any serious work or anything else. So to my mind, the 3D printed one is really good, and I like that. So I might live with that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Big thanks to my Patreon supporters. Especially the ones in the $10 bracket. That's a huge thing. It's a really amazing thing that you do, and it's something that makes all sorts of things possible, including this project. I want to say thanks for watching. Be kind to each other. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. And more soon, guys and girls.